If you've had a prostatectomy and you're still leaking, even though you've been doing your Kegels every single day, this video is for you. Because there's a good chance you've been told, just do your pelvic floor exercises. So that's what you've done. You've been squeezing, you've been holding, you've been doing your repetitions every single day, but you're still leaking. And that can be incredibly frustrating. Because you start wondering, are Kegels actually working? Am I doing them wrong? Should I just be doing more? The answer isn't necessarily to do more. So in this video, I'm going to explain some of the most common mistakes I see with pelvic floor training after prostatectomy, how to make sure you're actually contracting the right muscles, and how I'd approach your training differently. I'm Murray-Skey. I'm a men's health physiotherapist specialising in prostatectomy rehabilitation. So let's get into it. One of the biggest mistakes with Kegels is that the advice is way too simple. You get told, squeeze your pelvic floor, hold it, relax, and repeat. And that's basically it. But think about what you're actually asking your pelvic floor to do throughout the day. It's not just holding a contraction for 10 seconds. Your pelvic floor needs to help you maintain continence when you're walking around. It needs to respond when you cough, when you sneeze, when you laugh, when you stand up, when you lift something, and when you suddenly increase the pressure inside your abdomen. So there's more to pelvic floor function than simply being able to squeeze hard for 10 seconds. You need strength, you need endurance, you need the ability to contract quickly, and you need to be able to relax. And that's where I think a lot of men get stuck. They've been told to do their Kegels, but they've never really been shown what good pelvic floor training should actually feel like. The first mistake is using everything except your pelvic floor. When you try to do a Kegel, you might notice your buttocks tightening, your stomach might brace, your thighs might squeeze together, you might even hold your breath. And if you're doing all of that, you're making the exercise much harder than it needs to be. Instead, I want you to think about a small lifting and closing movement through the pelvic floor. You don't need to squeeze your entire body. You don't need to hold your breath. And you don't need to produce as much force as physically possible. Think about a controlled lift and then let it go. That's the movement you're trying to learn. One of the easiest ways to get a feel for this is to think about the muscles you'd use if you were trying to stop yourself from passing urine or gas. You should feel a subtle lift or closing sensation. Now, you've probably heard people say that you can test this by stopping your urine stream. I wouldn't recommend doing that as an exercise. If you've never been able to identify the muscles before, it can give you an idea of what you're looking for. But you don't want to repeatedly stop and start your urine stream as your pelvic floor workout. Once you've identified the sensation, practice it when you're not urinating. That's where you actually want to train the muscle. The second mistake is thinking that the harder you squeeze, the better the exercise is. This is one I see all the time. You get told to strengthen a muscle, so naturally you think, okay, I need to squeeze as hard as I possibly can. But pelvic floor training isn't a competition. You don't need to get extra points for producing the biggest squeeze. What matters is whether you can actually control the muscle. Can you contract it without holding your breath? Can you avoid tensing everything else? Can you hold the contraction without your technique falling apart? And can you actually completely relax afterwards? Those are much more useful questions. So instead of thinking maximum effort, think good quality contraction. You might start with a moderate contraction that you can actually control really well. Then you gradually build from there. Because if you're doing 50 repetitions, but the quality of those repetitions is terrible, doing another 50 probably isn't going to solve the problem. More isn't always better. Better is better. The third mistake is only doing long holds. Now, long holds aren't bad. They're actually useful. They help you develop endurance. And endurance is important because your pelvic floor has to support you throughout the day. But imagine someone tells you that the only way to train your leg muscles is to hold a squat for 30 seconds. You'd probably recognize that as incomplete training. Your pelvic floor is no different. It needs to be able to sustain a contraction, but it also needs to respond quickly. Think about when you cough. You don't have time to think, okay, I'm about to cough. Let's start my 10-second pelvic floor contraction. The response needs to happen quickly. That's why I also want you to think about short, quick contractions, and you're trying to make those movements controlled and accurate. So you've got two different qualities you're training. You've got your longer contractions for endurance and your quick contractions for those faster responses. Both have a place. So mistake 4, you're not actually relaxing. And this one is really important because when most people think about pelvic floor exercises, they think about squeezing. But the release is just as important. If you squeeze your pelvic floor and then immediately squeeze it again without properly relaxing, you're not really getting that full range of movement. Think about doing a biceps curl. You contract your biceps, then you lower the weight. You wouldn't spend your entire workout just holding your biceps maximally contracted. You need the muscle to contract and relax. The pelvic floor is the same. So when you're doing your exercises, don't rush through them. Squeeze, hold, and then actually let go. Feel the muscle relax, take a breath, then go again. If you're struggling to feel the relaxation, or you feel like you're constantly clenching your pelvic floor, that's something I'd recommend discussing with a pelvic health physiotherapist. Because sometimes the answer isn't, I need to strengthen this muscle more. Sometimes you need to improve your ability to control it. So what should you actually do? So let's put all of that together. If you're recovering from a prostatectomy and you're doing your pelvic floor exercises, I'd start by making sure you can actually find the right muscles. Then I'd focus on the quality of the contraction. You're looking for a controlled lift. You're not squeezing your glutes, you're not bracing your abs, you're not holding your breath. You're not trying to produce 100% effort on every repetition. Then I'd include both longer contractions and shorter, quicker contractions. And between each repetition, I'd make sure you're actually relaxing. That's the foundation, but there's another important point here. Your pelvic floor exercises shouldn't stay exactly the same forever. As you improve, you need to start challenging the pelvic floor in the positions and situations where you actually need it. You might start lying down, then progress to sitting, then standing, and eventually you want to be able to maintain good contractions or good control while you're doing normal activities like walking, lifting, exercising, moving around, because the end goal isn't, I want to become really good at doing Kegels while lying on my bed. The end goal is, I want to be able to live my life without constantly worrying about leaking. That's a very different goal. What if you're still leaking? Now, if you've been doing all of this consistently and you're still leaking, don't automatically assume you've failed. And don't automatically assume that you just need to do more Kegels. There are a number of factors that can influence continence recovery after prostatectomy. The stage of your recovery, how much you're leaking, when you're leaking, what activities trigger it, how your pelvic floor is working, and how you're progressing your rehabilitation. So if you're struggling, the next step isn't necessarily another 50 repetitions. It might be getting someone to actually assess what's happening, because you want to know what's causing me to leak rather than just how many Kegels can I do? That's a much better question. So if you've been doing Kegels every day and you're frustrated because you're still leaking, don't immediately assume that Kegels don't work. Instead, take a step back, make sure you're actually using the right muscles, make sure you're not squeezing everything else at the same time, and don't assume that harder is always better. Train both endurance and quick contractions, and make sure you're actually relaxing between repetitions. Because pelvic floor training isn't just about being able to squeeze, it's about being able to control the muscle. And if you can improve that control and progressively challenge it over time, you're giving yourself a much better foundation for your recovery. If you're going through prostatectomy recovery and you want more practical guidance on what to do at each stage, I've created a free community called the Prostatectomy Recovery Project. It's linked below. You can join for free, ask questions, and get more guidance around your recovery. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.